Marcus Williams had worked 3 jobs for 15 years to buy his dream cabin. The small wooden house sat perfectly on the edge of Crystal Lake, surrounded by tall pine trees and peaceful water. Every morning he would sit on his porch with coffee, watching the sunrise paint the lake golden. This was his sanctuary, his reward for all those long nights driving trucks and weekends fixing cars. The Pinewood Shores community had always been quiet. Most neighbors kept to themselves, offering friendly waves when they passed each other on the winding dirt roads. Marcus liked it that way. He had moved here 2 years ago, escaping the noise and stress of city life. His nearest neighbor, old Mr. Peterson, often stopped by to share fishing stories and homemade apple pie. Everything changed when Rebecca Sterling moved into the big house at the end of Maple Street. She arrived in a shiny black SUV, followed by a moving truck filled with expensive furniture. Within a week, she had introduced herself as the new president of the Pinewood Shores Homeowners Association. Marcus had never heard of any HOA before, but Rebecca assured everyone it was necessary to maintain property values and community standards. Rebecca was a tall woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that looked like they came from expensive stores. She spoke with authority and always carried a leather folder filled with papers. During her first community meeting, held in the old community center, she outlined her vision for improving the neighborhood. She talked about landscaping requirements, paint color approvals, and proper maintenance standards. Marcus attended that meeting out of curiosity. He listened as Rebecca explained new rules about lawn care, acceptable decorations, and even restrictions on when residents could have guests. Several longtime residents asked questions about costs and enforcement, but Rebecca dismissed their concerns with a wave of her hand. She insisted that property values would increase dramatically with proper management. After the meeting, Marcus approached Rebecca to introduce himself properly. He extended his hand with a warm smile, explaining that he lived in the lake cabin and worked as a mechanic in town. Rebecca's expression changed immediately when she learned where he lived. Her friendly smile disappeared, replaced by a cold stare that made Marcus uncomfortable. She looked him up and down, taking in his work clothes and calloused hands. Then she asked pointed questions about his property, wanting to know if he owned it outright or was renting. When Marcus confirmed he owned the cabin, Rebecca's frown deepened. She muttered something about checking property records and walked away without saying goodbye. That night, Marcus called his sister Jennifer to tell her about the strange encounter. Jennifer, who worked in real estate, warned him to be careful with HOA presidents who seemed too aggressive. She had seen situations where power-hungry board members made life difficult for residents they didn't like. Marcus laughed it off, thinking Rebecca just needed time to get used to the community. 2 weeks later, Marcus found an official-looking letter in his mailbox. The letter had read Pinewood Shores Homeowners Association in fancy gold letters. Rebecca had written a formal notice about several supposed violations on his property. She claimed his dock needed repainting, his grass was too long in some areas, and his pickup truck was an eyesore that violated community vehicle standards. Marcus read the letter twice, confused and angry. His dock was in perfect condition, painted just 6 months ago. His lawn was neat and well-maintained, better than most properties in the area. His truck was clean and parked in his own driveway. None of these things had been problems for the 2 years he had lived there. He decided to visit Rebecca in person to discuss the letter. Her house was impressive, with manicured gardens and a circular driveway. When she answered the door, her expression was cold and unwelcoming. Marcus politely explained that he disagreed with the violations and wanted to resolve any misunderstandings. Rebecca stood in her doorway with arms crossed, refusing to invite him inside. She insisted that standards had changed under her leadership and that all residents must comply immediately. When Marcus asked to see the specific rules she was referencing, Rebecca claimed they were still being finalized but were definitely enforceable. The conversation grew tense when Marcus pointed out that his property looked better than many others in the community. Rebecca's face reddened as she accused him of being argumentative and disrespectful to the HOA authority. She threatened additional fines if he continued to question her decisions. Marcus left feeling frustrated and confused. This was not the peaceful retirement community he had chosen. As he drove home past other properties, he noticed several that had actual maintenance issues: peeling paint, overgrown yards, broken fences. Yet none of those homeowners had received violation notices. That evening, Mr. Peterson stopped by with his usual friendly demeanor. Marcus showed him the violation letter, and the older man's face grew serious. Peterson revealed that Rebecca had been asking neighbors questions about Marcus, wanting to know about his background, his visitors, and his daily routines. She seemed particularly interested in whether he had the legal right to be living there. The harassment escalated quickly after Marcus's conversation with Mr. Peterson. Within days, Rebecca began driving past his cabin multiple times each day, slowing down to stare at his property. She would park across the street and take photos with her phone, making no effort to hide her surveillance activities. Marcus watched from his kitchen window, feeling like a prisoner in his own home. Rebecca's next move was more aggressive. She sent a second violation notice, this time claiming his outdoor furniture violated aesthetic guidelines. The letter demanded he remove his comfortable wooden chairs and small table from the porch within 48 hours or face mounting fines. Marcus had built that furniture himself during winter evenings, and it matched the cabin's rustic style perfectly. Determined to understand his rights, Marcus drove to the county courthouse to research property records and HOA documentation. The clerk, a helpful woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, searched through filing cabinets and computer databases. After an hour of investigation, she made a startling discovery. There was no legal record of any homeowners association for Pinewood Shores community. Mrs. Rodriguez explained that legitimate HOAs must file articles of incorporation, bylaws, and covenants with the county. They must also maintain registered agents and hold properly documented elections. None of these requirements had been met. Rebecca Sterling had essentially created a fake organization with no legal authority over anyone's property. Armed with this information, Marcus felt both relieved and angry. Rebecca had been attempting to intimidate him with threats that held no legal weight. He decided to confront her immediately, driving to her house with copies of the county records. This time he was prepared for her manipulation tactics. Rebecca answered the door wearing an expensive suit and holding her ever-present leather folder. Before she could speak, Marcus handed her the county documents and explained what he had discovered. Her face went through several expressions: surprise, anger, and finally cold calculation. She insisted that the paperwork was simply delayed and that her authority remained valid. Marcus stood his ground, pointing out that she had been collecting money from neighbors for an organization that didn't legally exist. He demanded she stop sending violation notices and cease her harassment immediately. Rebecca's composure cracked as she accused him of trying to destroy community improvements and property values. The argument grew heated when Rebecca claimed that Marcus didn't belong in their neighborhood anyway. She made thinly veiled comments about the type of people who should live in Pinewood Shores, suggesting that his presence was somehow diminishing the community's character. Marcus realized that her hostility went far beyond fake HOA authority. Rebecca's mask completely slipped when she declared that she would find other ways to make his life difficult. She mentioned having connections with local code enforcement, the sheriff's department, and city planning officials. Her threats became increasingly personal as she questioned whether someone with his background could really afford lakefront property. Marcus left the confrontation feeling disgusted, but determined. Rebecca's comments had revealed the true nature of her campaign against him. This wasn't about property maintenance or community standards. This was about someone who believed she could control who belonged in her vision of the perfect neighborhood. Over the next week, Rebecca's retaliation began in earnest. She started calling various county departments, filing false complaints about Marcus's property. Code enforcement officers appeared at his door, investigating reports of unpermitted structures, septic system problems, and zoning violations. Each inspection found no legitimate issues, but the constant disruption was exhausting. The harassment affected Marcus's work schedule, as he had to stay home for inspections and meetings with officials. His employer, understanding but concerned, warned that continued absences could affect his job security. Marcus found himself stressed and angry, losing sleep as he worried about Rebecca's next move. Rebecca also began spreading rumors throughout the community. She told neighbors that Marcus was hostile and uncooperative, painting herself as a victim trying to maintain community standards. Some residents, unaware of the truth about the fake HOA, began avoiding Marcus or giving him suspicious looks when they encountered him around town. The situation reached a new low when Rebecca convinced a towing company to remove Marcus's truck from his own driveway. She claimed it was abandoned and violated community parking regulations. Marcus arrived home from work to find his vehicle missing, and a towing notice stuck to his mailbox. It took hours and expensive fees to retrieve his truck from the impound lot. That evening, Marcus sat on his porch feeling defeated and frustrated. The peaceful lake view that had once brought him comfort now reminded him of the battle he was fighting just to enjoy his own property. Rebecca had managed to turn his sanctuary into a source of constant stress and conflict. Mr. Peterson visited again, bringing troubling news from around the neighborhood. Rebecca had been approaching other residents, asking them to sign a petition supporting stricter community enforcement. She was also inquiring about Marcus's visitors, his work schedule, and even his financial situation. Her obsession with controlling his presence was becoming increasingly obvious to longtime residents. Marcus decided he needed legal help to stop Rebecca's harassment campaign. He contacted Sarah Mitchell, a local attorney who specialized in property disputes and civil rights cases. Sarah listened carefully as Marcus explained the fake HOA, the constant violations notices, and Rebecca's escalating retaliation efforts. Her expression grew serious as she reviewed the documentation Marcus had gathered. Sarah immediately recognized the pattern of behavior as targeted harassment with possible discriminatory motives. She explained that Marcus had strong grounds for legal action, including restraining orders and civil lawsuits. However, she warned that Rebecca seemed prepared for a fight and might escalate her tactics before backing down. The attorney's prediction proved accurate within days. Rebecca filed a complaint with the county claiming that Marcus was operating an illegal business from his residential property. She alleged that his mechanical work and the visitors who came to pick up repaired vehicles violated zoning restrictions. Code enforcement officers arrived again, this time with more serious expressions and thicker case files. Marcus had occasionally fixed cars for friends and neighbors in his spare time, charging minimal fees to cover parts cost. This hobbyist activity was perfectly legal under county regulations, as Sarah quickly confirmed. However, the investigation process was disruptive and embarrassing, with official vehicles parked in his driveway while inspectors examined his small workshop area. Rebecca's next attack targeted Marcus's lake access rights. She filed paperwork claiming that his dock extended beyond his property boundaries into public waters. This complaint triggered a survey requirement that cost Marcus thousands of dollars. The survey ultimately confirmed that his dock was properly positioned within his legal boundaries, but the financial strain was significant. During this period, Marcus noticed Rebecca had begun hosting regular gatherings at her house. Cars would arrive in the evenings, and through his binoculars he could see her pointing toward his cabin while addressing small groups of neighbors. These meetings always seemed to coincide with new complaints being filed against his property the following day. The psychological pressure was taking its toll on Marcus. He found himself constantly checking his mailbox with dread, expecting new legal documents or violation notices. Sleep became difficult as he worried about what Rebecca might try next. His sister Jennifer urged him to consider selling the cabin and moving somewhere else, but Marcus refused to be driven from his dream home. Rebecca's campaign took a personal turn when she began investigating Marcus's background and employment history. She contacted his workplace, claiming to be conducting a community safety assessment. She asked pointed questions about his criminal record, financial stability, and character references. Marcus's supervisor informed him about the call, expressing concern about the unusual inquiry. The harassment extended to Marcus's visitors as well. When his nephew came to spend a weekend at the cabin, Rebecca called the sheriff's department reporting suspicious activity and unknown vehicles on the property. Deputies arrived to investigate, questioning both Marcus and his confused family member about their relationship and the purpose of the visit. Rebecca also began following Marcus around town, appearing at the grocery store, gas station, and restaurant where he regularly ate lunch. She would position herself nearby, taking photos and making phone calls while staring at him. The behavior was clearly intended to intimidate and unsettle him, and it was working. The situation reached a breaking point when Rebecca attempted to access Marcus's property directly. She claimed to be conducting an official HOA inspection and demanded entry to examine his septic system and electrical work. When Marcus refused and reminded her that no legal HOA existed, Rebecca became verbally aggressive and threatened to have him arrested for obstructing official duties. Marcus called 911 to report trespassing, and deputies arrived to find Rebecca still on his property, arguing loudly about her authority to be there. The officers listened to both sides, reviewed the county records Sarah had provided, and clearly explained to Rebecca that she had no legal right to enter Marcus's property or claim HOA authority. Rebecca's response to the police intervention was to file a restraining order against Marcus, claiming he had threatened her during their confrontations. The false allegations forced Marcus to attend court hearings and hire additional legal representation. Sarah worked aggressively to counter the fraudulent claims, presenting evidence of Rebecca's harassment campaign to the judge. The court proceedings revealed the extent of Rebecca's deception to the wider community. Local newspaper coverage of the fake HOA story brought attention to her tactics and motivated other residents to come forward with their own experiences. Several neighbors reported receiving similar violation notices and pressure to pay fees for the non-existent organization. Marcus realized that Rebecca's obsession with controlling him had grown into something much larger and more dangerous. She was willing to lie in court, waste public resources, and damage his reputation to achieve her goals. The peaceful cabin by the lake had become the center of a legal and personal battle that neither of them seemed able to walk away from. As winter approached, the conflict showed no signs of resolution. Rebecca's tactics had evolved from simple harassment to systematic persecution involving multiple government agencies and legal venues. Marcus faced mounting legal bills, constant stress, and the very real possibility that Rebecca's campaign might eventually succeed in forcing him from his home. Winter brought temporary relief as Rebecca seemed to scale back her daily surveillance activities. However, Marcus soon discovered she was using the quiet season to plan more sophisticated attacks on his right to remain in the community. Through his attorney Sarah, he learned that Rebecca had hired a private investigator to dig into his personal history and financial records. The investigator's findings disappointed Rebecca because Marcus's background was spotless. He had no criminal record, maintained excellent credit, and had been a model citizen throughout his adult life. Frustrated by the lack of damaging information, Rebecca shifted her strategy toward questioning the legitimacy of his property purchase itself. Rebecca filed a formal complaint with the county assessor's office, claiming that Marcus's property taxes were incorrectly calculated because his cabin exceeded the permitted square footage. This accusation triggered another expensive inspection process requiring Marcus to hire a certified appraiser and provide architectural documentation. The assessment confirmed that his property was properly valued and taxed. As spring returned to Crystal Lake, Rebecca's behavior became increasingly erratic and desperate. She began leaving handwritten notes on Marcus's door, demanding meetings to discuss community concerns. The notes were filled with veiled threats about property values and neighborhood safety, always signed with her official-sounding but meaningless title of HOA. President Marcus installed security cameras around his property after discovering evidence that someone had been walking around his cabin at night. The footage revealed Rebecca conducting nocturnal inspections, using a flashlight to examine his dock, vehicles, and outdoor equipment. She was clearly searching for any violation she could report to authorities. The harassment escalated when Rebecca convinced several newer residents to join her campaign against Marcus. She organized neighborhood meetings where she presented a distorted version of events, portraying herself as a concerned community leader fighting against an uncooperative property owner who refused to maintain standards. These meetings were carefully orchestrated to exclude longtime residents like Mr. Peterson who knew the truth about Rebecca's tactics. She scheduled them during work hours when Marcus couldn't attend to defend himself, then distributed meeting minutes that contained false statements about his property, condition, and attitude toward community improvement. Rebecca's coalition began pressuring local businesses to refuse service to Marcus. She visited the hardware store, grocery market, and auto parts supplier, claiming that Marcus was involved in legal disputes that reflected poorly on the community. Several business owners, wanting to avoid controversy, began treating Marcus with suspicion and reluctance. The social isolation was particularly painful for Marcus, who had always enjoyed friendly relationships with local merchants and service providers. Simple errands became uncomfortable encounters where he felt judged and unwelcome. Rebecca had successfully turned his small-town support network against him through misinformation and manipulation. Sarah advised Marcus to document everything and consider filing civil rights complaints with state and federal agencies. The pattern of harassment, combined with Rebecca's comments about who belonged in the neighborhood, suggested discriminatory motivation that could trigger stronger legal protections and penalties. Rebecca's next attack targeted Marcus's employment directly. She contacted his employer, claiming to represent concerned neighbors who were worried about having a controversial figure working in their community. She suggested that Marcus's legal troubles and confrontational attitude made him unsuitable for customer service responsibilities. Marcus's boss called him into a serious meeting about the complaints. Although the supervisor didn't believe Rebecca's accusations, the constant negative attention was affecting the business's reputation. Marcus was forced to take unpaid leave while his employer investigated the allegations and considered how to handle the situation. The financial pressure from lost wages, legal fees, and inspection costs was becoming overwhelming. Marcus had depleted his savings account and was considering taking loans against his cabin's equity. Rebecca's campaign was achieving its goal of making his life so difficult and expensive that leaving seemed like the only practical option. During this dark period, an unexpected ally emerged. Mrs. Chen, a retired teacher who lived 2 miles down the lake, contacted Marcus after hearing about his situation through community gossip. She revealed that Rebecca had approached her months earlier, trying to recruit support for removing undesirable elements from the lake community. Mrs. Chen had been disgusted by Rebecca's barely concealed prejudice and had begun quietly investigating her background and tactics. She discovered that Rebecca had used similar harassment strategies against minority residents in her previous neighborhood before moving to Pinewood Shores. A pattern of discrimination was becoming clear. Armed with this new information, Sarah filed complaints with the State Attorney General's office and the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. She argued that Rebecca's actions constituted housing discrimination based on race, violating both state and federal civil rights laws. The government investigations brought unwanted scrutiny to Rebecca's activities. Federal investigators interviewed neighbors, reviewed her fake HOA documents, and examined the timeline of her complaints against Marcus. The official attention seemed to rattle Rebecca's confidence for the first time since the conflict began. However, instead of backing down, Rebecca made her most dangerous move yet. She filed a lawsuit against Marcus, claiming that his presence in the community had caused her emotional distress and damaged her property values. The frivolous lawsuit was designed to drain his resources and force him into bankruptcy through legal defense costs. Marcus faced a critical decision point as summer arrived at Crystal Lake. He could continue fighting Rebecca's increasingly expensive legal attacks, risking financial ruin and years of continued harassment, or he could accept defeat and sell his dream cabin to escape the psychological and monetary toll of her persecution. Marcus decided to fight back with everything he had. The federal civil rights investigation had given him hope that justice might prevail, and he refused to let Rebecca's harassment campaign succeed. Sarah filed a comprehensive countersuit against Rebecca, seeking damages for the emotional distress, financial losses, and civil rights violations he had endured. The countersuit detailed every aspect of Rebecca's persecution, from the fake HOA violations to the midnight property surveillance. Sarah included evidence of Rebecca's discriminatory comments and her systematic efforts to drive Marcus from the community based on her prejudices about who belonged in the neighborhood. Rebecca's reaction to the countersuit was swift and vicious. She escalated her harassment to include Marcus's family members, calling his sister Jennifer's real estate office to make complaints about her brother's character. She also contacted Marcus's elderly parents, claiming to be a concerned neighbor worried about their son's legal troubles. The attacks on his family crossed a line that Marcus couldn't tolerate. He realized that Rebecca's obsession had grown beyond simple neighborhood disputes into something darker and more personal. She was willing to hurt innocent people to achieve her goal of forcing him out of Pinewood Shores. Sarah obtained a temporary restraining order against Rebecca, prohibiting her from contacting Marcus, his family, or his employer. The court order also banned her from entering his property or conducting surveillance activities. Violating the restraining order would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Rebecca tested the restraining order within days, driving slowly past Marcus's cabin while talking loudly on her phone about property values and neighborhood problems. Marcus called the sheriff's department, and deputies arrested Rebecca for violating the court order. She spent a night in jail before posting bail and receiving a stern warning from the judge. The arrest seemed to shock Rebecca into recognizing the seriousness of her situation. For several weeks, her harassment activities stopped completely. Marcus enjoyed his first peaceful period in over a year, spending quiet evenings on his porch without constantly watching for Rebecca's car or worrying about new legal documents. However, the calm was temporary. Rebecca hired an expensive attorney and launched a more sophisticated legal strategy. She filed appeals challenging the restraining order and submitted documentation attempting to legitimize her fake HOA claims. Her lawyer argued that the civil rights complaints were frivolous, and that Rebecca was the real victim of harassment. That the legal battle intensified as both sides prepared for court proceedings that would determine the outcome of their conflict. Discovery proceedings revealed the full extent of Rebecca's harassment campaign, including financial records showing she had spent thousands of dollars on private investigators, legal fees, and filing frivolous complaints. Marcus's attorney uncovered evidence that Rebecca had attempted similar tactics against minority residents in 3 previous communities where she had lived. A pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning over a decade was documented, strengthening the federal civil rights case significantly. The breakthrough came when Mrs. Chen provided Sarah with recordings she had secretly made during Rebecca's early recruitment attempts. The audio clearly captured Rebecca making explicitly racist comments about Marcus and expressing her determination to force him out of the Lake community, regardless of the legal consequences. Rebecca's attorney immediately attempted to suppress the recordings, arguing they were obtained illegally. However, the judge ruled that Mrs. Chen had been within her rights to record conversations taking place on her own property, and the evidence was admitted into the court record. The recordings devastated Rebecca's legal position and exposed her true motivations to the entire community. Local media coverage of the recordings brought regional attention to the case, with civil rights organizations offering support and resources to Marcus's legal team. Facing potential federal prosecution and a civil lawsuit that could bankrupt her, Rebecca finally agreed to settlement negotiations. Her attorney approached Sarah with an offer to resolve all claims in exchange for Rebecca's agreement to cease all harassment activities and relocate away from the lake community. Marcus was initially reluctant to accept any settlement that didn't include significant financial compensation for the damages he had suffered. However, Sarah explained that the most important victory would be ending Rebecca's ability to continue her harassment campaign and ensuring she faced consequences for her discriminatory behavior. The settlement negotiations revealed that Rebecca's harassment of Marcus had been financially devastating for her as well. She had spent her inheritance and taken loans against her house to fund the legal attacks, private investigators, and court filings. Her obsession with controlling Marcus had consumed her life and resources. During mediation sessions, Rebecca showed no remorse for her actions, but clearly understood that continued legal proceedings would result in criminal prosecution and financial ruin. She reluctantly agreed to strict terms that would end her harassment while avoiding prison time. The final settlement required Rebecca to pay substantial damages to Marcus, formally acknowledge that no legitimate HOA existed, and agree to a permanent restraining order. Most importantly, she was required to sell her house and move at least 50 miles away from Crystal Lake within 6 months. As autumn returned to the lake, Marcus watched Rebecca's moving trucks carry away her expensive furniture and hostile presence. The community began healing from the division and suspicion she had created through her manipulation and lies. Neighbors who had been turned against Marcus gradually learned the truth and resumed friendly relationships. The settlement money allowed Marcus to repair the financial damage Rebecca's harassment had caused. He paid off the loans he had taken against his cabin, covered the legal fees that had drained his savings, and even made improvements to his property that he had been postponing during the legal battle. The doc got a fresh coat of paint, and he built a new workshop for his automotive hobby. Marcus returned to work with his employer's full support and understanding. His boss had learned the truth about Rebecca's false complaints and felt terrible about the stress Marcus had endured. The company even gave him a bonus to help offset the income he had lost during his forced leave of absence. The federal civil rights investigation concluded with findings that confirmed Rebecca had violated housing discrimination laws. While she avoided criminal prosecution through the settlement agreement, the case became part of a federal database tracking discriminatory housing practices. Any future complaints about her behavior would be viewed in the context of her established pattern of harassment. Mrs. Chen became a close friend and frequent visitor to Marcus's cabin. She revealed that she had been documenting Rebecca's activities since their first conversation because she recognized the signs of someone who would not stop until forced to do so. Her evidence had been crucial to building the strong legal case that ultimately defeated Rebecca's campaign. Mr. Peterson organized a community gathering to welcome Marcus back to peaceful enjoyment of his property. Neighbors who had been manipulated by Rebecca's lies apologized for their suspicion and offered friendship. The fake HOA was officially dissolved, and residents agreed that any future community organization would be properly formed with transparent leadership and legal oversight. The local newspaper published a detailed story about the case, warning other communities about fake HOA scams and discriminatory harassment tactics. Sarah used the case as an example in her legal practice, helping other victims of similar discrimination understand their rights and legal options for fighting back against harassment. Marcus's cabin became more beautiful and peaceful than ever before. Without the constant stress of legal battles and surveillance, he was able to enjoy the lake views and quiet mornings that had originally drawn him to the property. He resumed his weekend fishing trips with Mr. Peterson and started hosting family gatherings that Rebecca had once tried to disrupt. The settlement agreement included provisions that prevented Rebecca from contacting Marcus or returning to the lake community for any reason. Violation of these terms would result in immediate prosecution and prison time. The permanent restraining order gave Marcus legal protection against any future harassment attempts. Rebecca's house sold quickly to a young family who brought positive energy to the neighborhood. The new owners were friendly and respectful, interested in becoming part of the community rather than controlling it. They removed the pretentious landscaping Rebecca had installed and replaced it with a welcoming garden that children could play in safely. Marcus learned valuable lessons about standing up to bullies and the importance of having strong legal representation when facing discrimination. He became an advocate for other property owners dealing with HOA disputes, sharing his experience and connecting them with resources to protect their rights. The case also prompted local government officials to strengthen oversight of homeowners associations and improve verification procedures for community organizations. New regulations required legitimate HOAs to maintain current registrations and prohibited the collection of fees by unregistered groups claiming authority over residential properties. As winter arrived at Crystal Lake, Marcus sat on his porch with a cup of hot coffee, watching snowflakes fall gently on the peaceful water. The silence was no longer broken by Rebecca's car driving past or the stress of wondering what legal document might arrive in his mailbox. For the first time in 2 years, he felt truly at home. His sister Jennifer visited for the holidays, bringing their parents to see the cabin they had heard so much about during the legal troubles. The family gathering was everything Marcus had dreamed of when he first bought the property. Warm, relaxing, and filled with laughter echoing across the quiet lake. Marcus reflected on how Rebecca's hatred and prejudice had ultimately failed to achieve their goal. Instead of driving him away, her harassment had strengthened his resolve to stay and fight for his rights. The legal victory had established important precedents for protecting other homeowners from similar discrimination and fake authority schemes. The settlement funds also allowed Marcus to establish a small legal defense fund for community members facing housing discrimination. Working with Sarah's law firm, he created a resource that could help future victims access legal representation without facing the financial hardship he had endured during his own battle. Crystal Lake remained his sanctuary, just as he had always envisioned. The sunrise still painted the water golden each morning, the fish still jumped near his dock in the evenings, and the pine trees still whispered in the gentle breeze. Rebecca's brief but destructive presence had become just an unpleasant memory. overshadowed by the peace and satisfaction of knowing he had fought injustice and won.